Now, I don't know if I'm using I don't know if I'm using the terms alpha and beta properly according to like video game designers or digital product designers.
Right.
So if I'm not, then I'm not. But at the moment, now I'm thinking of a point where plenty of design assessment continues, but enough of the way it works is now in place and the scope of how it's played is in place in your mind so that you don't really feel the need to change that up. Instead, you're working out subroutines and you're thinking about what could be completely cut out, but you're mostly assessing how you're presenting it to others. You have a pretty good idea of what they should be doing with most of the pieces. The question is, what do you tell them, especially people who haven't encountered it? How do you tell them what to do? In what order are the necessary pieces of information given? And and what are the things that don't really have to be told at first in terms of what you do to play. If you do that, if you are working on that and you are therefore necessarily constructing what rules need to be written down and which ones explained or taught, and in what way, that's what I would tend to think of as beta work. You're working not only on the game mechanics, because you still are, but you're really working on how they're conveyed. The tricky thing is that it's real easy to complete the work at this stage and then think that you've written a manuscript, and you haven't. You've merely got down all the things that need to be down, and then you have to go all the way back to the beginning when it comes time and say, okay, now I've got to write this thing from scratch. Some of it may be usable, some of it won't, but now I'm in pure product design. And my writing is product design. Now, I'm going to say that it's kind of tough at this point. This is harder to stay on track because it's so tempting to just veer straight into product design and not do further playtesting at this point. This is when you do want it to encounter people who don't know it. This is when you do want to run it past people whose points of view are perhaps different from yours, even though, again, the whole idea that people should sit down and play test with a good will is very important. But to actually have the thing get, a little more battle tested in that sense, while you're learning exactly how to present it, that's what this phase is about. Frankly, I think most games get about 10 to 20% of the time and attention they need at this phase. I think this is what gets shorted. And it's tough because you're building something that really does look like a manuscript, and you're coming up with fine-honing your explanations of things, but you're still not really working on the manuscript. You're really just working on the optimized play document, a usage document. You're not working on teaching it. You're working on simply getting it all down so that all the pieces are actually there. And that sometimes means you look at a whole subroutine and you say, you know what, this thing, we don't even need it. We keep screwing it up every single time. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. I was in love with it, but it's got to go.
Yeah.
Or other times, somewhat painfully, you say, you know what? I swore I wouldn't. But a classic damage roll right here seems like a really good idea after all.
Right.
Stuff like that. But it is, but you're making finalized or nearly finalized decisions. And at this point, it's probably not too bad to fantasize about what the product will look like. People, commission art at this point, usually, with a pretty good idea that they're going to use that art, but it isn't like the entire art budget for the entire thing at this point. It's just a few pieces from an artist that you really, really want.
Right.
The trouble is, this is where if you were to print it out and staple it, you would call it an ashcan. And the important thing, as I keep saying over and over again, the important thing is to recognize that an ashcan is not a rough draft. It is a rough design, but it's not a rough draft of the product. And so really, staving people off from their publication plans is not really a self-serving consultant thing to do.
Right.
It'd be much better for me as a consultant if I say, stick with me, kid. I'll give you all the publishing advice you need. You should do this and you should do that. And we move straight into the whole business of choosing a printer.
Right.
And people would love it because they, it's very concrete, and they'll feel like, oh my God, he's helping me. He's getting it done. I'm getting it from the printer in 2 weeks. That's amazing, Ron.
Right.
But as somebody who's been helping people with their games all these years, now I know that's a really terrible thing to do to somebody before they have really taken their game through this phase. So I don't know. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, definitely.
So those are kind of the design. We're moving into publishing decisions, and I want to stay away from that. From the design angle, working on the game after you feel as though what the game is very clear in your mind. Working on it at that point, that's where you're playing it past the point that you've played in previously. This is what I like to joke about, that's why so many games work best for the first and second sessions, because all the playtesting never got past the second session. So everything that happens to characters after that, or how they develop after that, or how the setting develops after that, remains a pipe dream on the part of the writer and designer, and so therefore it doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
Whereas here is where you kind of have to stick it out and play long term. If the game is designed to go long term, that is.
Yeah, definitely.
But even if it, like in Kinfolk, if it is designed for 5 sessions, you got to stick it out for the 5.
Yeah.
At this stage. And you will find that the 5th session, rules that are supposed to work a certain way, or the emergent properties of other rules that really kick in at that phase, you'll find they all stink, and you're going to have to basically be at the proto stage on those.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of the hardest lesson, taking it through. The People's Hero is an excellent example of that. If we're talking about the first few scenes of play, you'll find that the rules are actually quite fine.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, if you were to continue to play, you would say, wow, I'm not sure this is working, or this looks like it needs work, or how is that supposed to work again, and stuff like that. It's just the rules that pertain to the later stages of play just haven't been through the fire enough, in actuality, for the writing to actually convey what it needs to convey, and for perhaps the rules even to do what they're supposed to do.
Right.
So, okay, does that help a little bit in terms of my thoughts on where to kind of keep your headspace as you're going through these phases?
It helps a lot, actually. Yeah.
Because it's real easy to get thrown off by the social status scene of game design and publication. It's real easy to get thrown off by another personality who elects themselves your expert.
Right.
And it's real easy to get thrown off by getting out of sync in terms of what you're actually working on in terms of written work. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I have So, do you think that there's a distinction between the alpha and beta phase, or is that kind of like one big long phase? Because there's the pre-alpha, which is very clear to me, and then beta seems clear to me. I'm not totally certain on alpha, or if alpha and beta are kind of lumped in your mind.
Well, I think there's a big difference. I think there's a quantum shift when you feel as though the working pieces, like your diagram, there is a diagram now. And so instead of kind of trying to dope out, gee, what pieces do I want and how are they going to go together? And there are a few pieces that I'm real sold on, but who knows how that relates to long-term play? Should it be short-term play? Hey, wait a minute, this should be a two-player game. That kind of thing. That's all kind of that alpha proto kind of and alpha messing with phase. When you're feeling secure about those things, and now you're working on whether they really work throughout play, whether there's enough options, whether there's too many options. How do you explain it to people? That's the beta phase. And I think it's the kind of thing you've shifted the phase only after you've done it. So it's not like you say, today we shall move into beta. It's more like, oh, wow, it looks like I'm in beta now.
Right.
Sometimes I think that another difference is when it starts to kind of take over your design efforts. When you say, you know what, all those other things, I'll work on them a little bit, but I want to get a little bit done on this every day. I want a little bit more. I can't stop myself. Every day I do a little bit more. I go and I read that paragraph again, or I go and I muse over, I run the numbers a few times in my head or on paper. If I don't have a playtest scheduled or a new session scheduled, I'm annoyed. I want a new session, on tap at all times for this thing. And, you're hefting it around. Or that folder is open on your hard drive all the time.
Right.
That's pretty much a beta-ish thing, I would say. And again, I'm not entirely certain that the need to distinguish between the phases is all that important. The big change, the big thing that is the most concrete and important shift is when you say, I am now designing, promoting, and publishing product. That when you say that's my job now, that's the big shift right there. The only one that is really, night and day. And that's much later than anything I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
I guess there's sort of a harsh way to say some of the things I've been saying, which is that sometimes it's kind of good to fire someone, like somebody who's been playtesting the game with you for a long time, or someone who has just jumped in to be invested in the game, or somebody who you've been relying on for a while, and maybe they've been wonderful, but now it's time for you to kind of move on and do it your way. Or maybe you realize that they're just not in sync with this thing and really haven't been from the beginning.
Right.
Any of those things, and that it's okay to fire people in your own mind. You just don't call them to play again. And that's okay. They'll play something else. That again is not typical advice. The typical advice is, no, you got to listen to everybody. Everybody's perspective is valuable. Branch out, get as many eyeballs on it as you can. Listen carefully to what everybody has to say. And I'm kind of saying the opposite. No, that's a bad idea. Better to, kind of take control of your own sense of what this purpose is. And ultimately, you're going to have to make decisions based on that anyway. Yeah. Excellent. I will talk to you later on.
Thank you very much.
Good night.